Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on a journey that honestly might just flip your entire worldview completely upside down. We're going to dive deep into some incredibly profound ideas from Adlerian psychology. And fair warning, these ideas, they're going to directly challenge the very core of how we view ourselves, our pasts, and the daily struggles we all go through.
So let's just dive right in with a pretty massive question. What if your past actually doesn't dictate your future? I know, right? It almost sounds counterintuitive. We live in a world that is constantly telling us our past traumas entirely define who we are today. But what if we completely flip that universally accepted idea on its head? What if you are actually in the driver's seat, right now at this very moment?
To figure this out, we're pulling from a massive Japanese phenomenon called the courage to be disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. This brilliant book is actually structured as a dialogue between a young man and a philosopher, and it perfectly distills the teachings of Alfred Adler. Now, Adler is an absolute giant of psychology, though he kind of gets overshadowed by names like Freud and Jung. But trust me, by the time we're done here, you're going to be rethinking everything you thought you knew about human psychology.
All right, let's kick things off with Act 1, the myth of trauma.
Let's start with what is probably Alfred Adler's most controversial claim, the absolute denial of trauma. I know, that sounds extreme, but hear me out. To understand why he says this, think about well water. Objectively speaking, well water stays at right around 60 degrees all year round. That's just a measurable, scientific fact. But if you drink that water on a scorching 100-degree summer day, it feels incredibly cool and refreshing, right? Now, if you drink that exact same water in the dead of winter, it feels warm. The water literally hasn't changed at all. It's your environment and your perception that changed. Adler argues that we don't actually live in an objective reality. We live in a completely subjective world of our own making.
And this brings us to a really powerful quote from Adler. He says, "We do not suffer from the shock of our experiences, the so-called trauma, but instead we make out of them whatever suits our purposes." So he's completely throwing out Freudian trauma here. He's essentially telling us that yourself is not determined by the terrible things that have happened to you in the past, but rather by the meaning you choose to attach to those experiences today. We aren't being pushed by the past, we're actually just pulling from it to serve whatever needs we have right now.
Moving right along to Act 2, Purpose over Past.
So if our past isn't pushing us from behind, what exactly is pulling us forward? Well, it basically comes down to two totally different ways of looking at psychology. On one hand, we have Freudian etiology. That's the classic cause and effect model we're all super used to. The idea that past events strictly determine your present state. But then, on the other hand, we have Adlerian teleology. Teleology is basically the study of the purpose behind a given phenomenon. Adler's forward-looking approach suggests that your present goals are actually what dictate your behavior. For example, you don't stay locked in your room because you're anxious from being bullied in the past. Rather, you manufacture that anxiety in the present as a tool to achieve your current goal, which is safely staying inside and avoiding people.
Let's break this cognitive process down with an example from the book that, let's face it, we can probably all relate to. Step 1, you're at a cafe and a waiter accidentally spills coffee all over your brand new jacket, which is definitely enough to ruin anyone's morning. But look at Step 2. A subconscious goal is instantly created in your mind to dominate that waiter and make him submit to you. Then, Step 3, the emotion of anger is rapidly fabricated as a tool to achieve that goal. Think about that for a second. You didn't yell because the anger overpowered you, you pulled anger right out of your mental toolbox so you could shout and assert dominance. Our emotions don't control us at all. We actually just use them to reach our goals.
Which leads us nicely into Act 3, the interpersonal trap.
Okay, so if we're constantly fabricating our own emotions to achieve internal goals, how does that actually play out when we interact with other people? Well, take a second and really let the sheer weight of this massive psychological statement sink in. All problems are interpersonal relationship problems. Yep, all of them. Adler totally asserts that there is no such thing as purely internal worry. Literally, if you lived completely alone in the universe, no society, no expectations, just you, every single one of your problems would just vanish. The shadow of another person is always, always present in our anxieties.
So, if all our problems are interpersonal, why on earth do so many of us struggle with low self-esteem? Well, Adler argues that disliking yourself is actually a manufactured tool used to avoid getting hurt by others. We actively invent our own shortcomings. We choose to dislike ourselves simply as a convenient excuse to avoid the inevitable pain, rejection, and friction that comes with social relationships. Think about it. If you firmly believe you're unlovable, well, you have the perfect alibi to stay safely hidden in your shell, and you never have to risk interpersonal rejection at all. It's a defense mechanism.
Let's dig even deeper into that with Act 4, the inferiority trap. Now that we know we sometimes use our own flaws as defensive shields, we really need to talk about a widely misunderstood concept, inferiority. How do we use it? Because it can be either a launch pad or a hiding place. First off, let's clearly define a feeling of inferiority. According to Adler, this is actually a natural, extremely healthy sense of lacking. Look, we are all born helpless, right? And we share this universal desire to escape that state and improve. A perfectly healthy feeling of inferiority makes you look at a goal and say, I'm not quite there yet, so I need to study, I need to train, and I need to grow. It's literally the positive launch pad for all human progress.
But here's where it gets tricky. Let's see how that healthy drive can snowball into something far more dangerous, the inferiority complex. We toss this term around a lot, but what does it really mean? Adler defines it as an abnormal state where someone uses their feeling of inferiority as a cowardly excuse to just not try. It's the logic of saying, well, I'm not well educated, so I can't possibly succeed in life. Instead of striving for growth, the person uses their perceived deficit as a permanent, built-in justification to just give up.
And that brings us to the really fascinating flip side of the coin, the superiority complex. This happens when someone can't tolerate their own inferiority complex, but they also just don't have the courage to put in real effort. So they look for the easy way out. They mask their deep feelings of inferiority by acting superior, by boasting, or, and this is wild, by actually bragging about their own misfortune. Have you ever met someone who weaponizes their trauma to seem special or to control the people around them? That's exactly this. Adler points out that boasting is always born from a profound feeling of inferiority. Truly confident people, they just don't need to brag.
All right, let's wrap this up with Act V. Life is not a competition.
So how do we actually escape this exhausting cycle of interpersonal traps and inferiority complexes? Well, Adler gives us this really beautiful, liberating visual for human progress. Imagine that we are all just walking equally on this vast, entirely flat space. There is no vertical ladder to climb, there are no winners standing on top of losers. We are all just walking forward at our own individual pace. Sure, we definitely have different levels of experience or knowledge, but fundamentally, we are all equal. You are not walking to compete with the person next to you, you're just walking to progress past who you were yesterday. Because if you refuse to see life as that flat space, you fall right into the danger of competition. And honestly, the toxic effects of that are severe. If life is a competition, you are forced to constantly, endlessly compare yourself to others. You live your entire life in a perpetual state of fearing a loss. And worst of all, everyone around you essentially becomes a terrifying enemy, just lying in wait to defeat you. If you view the world through that lens, you will never, ever experience a single moment of true peace.
And this brings us to the ultimate mindset shift. You literally have to choose equality over competition. When you start seeing the people around you as comrades instead of enemies, the world suddenly transforms into a safe, welcoming place. You're finally freed from that exhausting, heavy fear of losing. And the most beautiful part is that because you aren't competing anymore, you can actually celebrate other people's happiness with all of your heart, knowing for a fact that their success is not your defeat. And that leads us to our final lingering thought for you today. Do you have the courage to choose a new lifestyle today? Look, Adlerian psychology strips away all of our comfortable excuses. It tells us point blank that our past isn't what's holding us back. Our present lack of courage is. And yes, it is absolutely terrifying to step out of your old patterns, drop those protective complexes, and start viewing the world as a community of comrades. But that choice, it's entirely up to you. You have the power to change your life right now. So, the real question is, do you have the courage to be happy? Definitely something to think about as you go through your day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it brought some clarity and some fresh perspective to your learning journey. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.